Right. Well, I am super excited to have Angie Cook here with us today. Angie is going to be talking to us about the L.E.G.S model and a little bit about Angie. Angie's remarkable leadership and communication skills have defined an extensive successful career working with dogs and families in both sheltering and behavior consulting. She previously worked as director of operations at Asheville Humane Society and developed their first behavior and community outreach programs along with Kim Brophy. She has worked closely with the Dog Door for over a decade as an invaluable partner committed to the evolution of standards and practices in canine welfare and behavior. We're super excited to have you here today, Angie. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. Can I share my screen for my presentation? Is that?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I have that. Here we go. Let's see if I can do this, make it happen. Move myself out of the way. Great. Can everybody see that?
Yep, that looks great.
All right, cool. So yes, thank you so much for asking me to speak today. I always really love any opportunity to geek out and talk about dogs in general and L.E.G.S with anyone. So very, very excited to be here, and I hope you all get something out of this. When I first put this together, I have a lot to say, and I probably won't get to say everything that I want to say. So I'm going to work real hard to get it all in. But I've already had to pare this down like so much. So here we go. So just real quick, my L.E.G.S. We kind of use that as a euphemism for what everyone's bringing to the table. And so my L.E.G.S, as they pertain to this conversation, are, as was mentioned, I was the director of operations. Actually started as a director of operations. Well, actually I started as a volunteer and then animal care. I've served in many capacities in rescue and sheltering, and I feel like that gives me a really unique perspective of all the facets. But I quickly became the director of operations for a very small rescue, was limited mission, strict adoption policies. And about 3 years into my tenure, we were acquired by the Asheville Humane Society, which is another larger rescue here in Asheville, North Carolina. It is also contracted to run the municipal shelter. So we were dealing with those dogs as well as the dogs we were adopting out, dogs and cats and horses and all of those pigs and lovely animals. And about a month into my time at Asheville Humane Society, I was made director of operations there. And one of my very first assignments was to create a behavior program with Kim Brophy. And this was done at a time where behavior programs really, we really weren't talking a lot about behavior. We were doing behavior assessments, and that's kind of as far as we were going with it. And so that was one of the first things that I did. And then we also developed the Thrive Together Beyond No Kill Life Worth Living movement while I was there, as well as the first community outreach program in Asheville. I was also on the board of North Carolina Animal Foundation, which is a bunch of different animal care practitioners, animal control, rescue, sheltering, that all get together to collaborate on best practices and just kind of how to better improve what we're doing. About 10 years into my work, I left to become a certified dog behavior consultant and was then made the head of the shelter division for the FDM Family Dog Mediation licensure program. So just to qualify, why the heck am I talking to you about these things? That's why that's my background. So what is L.E.G.S? L.E.G.S, you can read right here. So it's an approach to observing, working, and living with dogs that recognizes where they are and meets them where they're at, bringing their unique recipe of learning, environment, genetics, and self. Basically, Kim synthesized a myriad of the different animal sciences to come up with the L.E.G.S model. So we're looking at canine cognition, canine psychology, neurology, neurobiology, neuroethology, and ethology, which is it's just kind of the main lens that we're looking through when we're talking about L.E.G.S. L.E.G.S is also a paradigm shift toward considering dogs as biological animals whose behavior is the product of their interaction between nature and nurture. And it's not that that conversation is devoid, or that our conversations are devoid of that concept, but our culture has kind of strayed from that, and we put dogs up to higher standards than any other species on the planet, really, if you take a look at it. And with domestication of dogs and bringing them into our houses, into our beds, we have put a set of unrealistic expectations that they're unattainable for dogs, and it creates this cognitive dissonance for us, because basically we're looking at our dogs as our pets, and they're these cute little things that we dress up as turnips for Halloween, and when they act like animals, it creates this dissonance in us, and part of the reason for that is that in the grand scheme of evolution, human beings are not that far removed from the time where growling and showing of teeth from other animals was a sign to get the heck out of Dodge. And so when that is happening in the comfort of our own homes, that activates our autonomic nervous systems, and it doesn't feel good. But that's how dogs communicate, right? And so we're at this this kind of crossroads with the dogs, where they can't exhibit their natural behaviors and their natural ways of communicating, because it actually creates a physical, a visceral sensation in us. And then there's also the cultural myth that because we have behaviorism, and because we're so good at changing behavior and affecting change and even emotional states in dogs, that we can just train the animal out of them. And we have lots of research that shows that that's just not true. We can do a lot of things to help dogs learn skills and do all sorts of amazing things. But when push comes to shove, we're never going to actually train the animal and the instinct out of them. And what this dissonance has created is basically these unrealistic expectations that then land dogs in shelters and up for relinquishment and rehoming. That's we want to bring that back into the conversation of, like, first and foremost, dogs are animals, and then there are pets. And what is normal for an animal, and what's natural for an animal, and what, as a human being, are you willing to tolerate, so the dogs have a better chance of getting the shot that they need. L.E.G.S talks a lot about genetics, but we do not and have never said that genetics is predictive of behavior. It just kind of explains things when they pop up. But we also very much believe that it's not all how you raise them. So when looking at L.E.G.S, we are looking at a set of principles, and one is learning, that dogs are taking in new information constantly and adapting their behavior to it. They're taking in information differently from one another and from us. So they see the world and how it operates differently than we do, and they learn at different capacities than other dogs do. But they're also learning all the time and not just when we sit them down to learn something. Environment, dogs are designed to thrive in certain conditions, and many have been developed for certain niches and need specific affordances. They're social animals, and they're in need of stable, predictable relationships with all other members of their environment. So when we're looking at environment, we're looking at physical and social environment. Genetics, dogs come with traits that are designed by humans for functionality, as well as traits that are adapted by nature for survival that are passed on from previous generations. And there are all sorts of other things to consider as far as genetics goes. We've learned so many things in the field of genetics over the past decade, but this is kind of the basis, the foundation that we're looking at. And then self. Dogs have their own unique internal experience based on age, development, health, sex, temperament, all sorts of things. So all dogs are indeed individuals. And then I just wanted to kind of briefly give you an overview of what it was like when we did L.E.G.S when we implemented L.E.G.S at Asheville Humane Society. So like I mentioned before, we implemented it at a time when behavior programs were not a priority. And leadership wanted the dogs to be less stressed, present better, have lower length of stay, and adoption returns. That's what we all want, right? And so we brought on Kim Brophy to guide the development of the program. And she was actually just in the first phase of writing her first draft for her book at that time. And so we took a lot of what she was putting together for that and incorporated it into our work with the shelter. What we had were two phases. Phase one focused on adoptions and dogs in the adoption center. And then phase two focused on intake and just sheltering in general. Everything that kind of came in between intake and then disposition. We implemented phase one, which was highly successful. And what that looked like was incorporating PPPs, which is PPP stands for predictable pattern of precedence. So it's just putting patterns and predictability in place for the dogs while they're in the shelter. We looked at kennel placement based on just the dog's behavior in general, as well as any kind of genetic predispositions to behaviors that they may have had. We looked at genetic specific enrichment and made sure that the environment afforded them with the things that they needed to thrive. Time with other dogs and with people, looking at the social aspects. And then we also incorporated nap time. Dogs are diurnal and polyphasic sleepers, and they can't be up all day partying and then sleep all night and expect to have lower levels of cortisol. So we put a strict nap time in place where no one came in or out of the animal care area, and the dogs could just chill. They could just sleep if they wanted to, and it was really, really successful. They were actually much calmer in the afternoon when they woke up from their nap. Unfortunately, phase two was never implemented because I left, and new people were brought in, and they had different priorities than I had, and so we didn't end up doing that. And they're actually not doing the program at all anymore. So we're very much looking forward to finding another shelter or shelters that would like to do it. So considering L.E.G.S and sheltering, and this is not an exhaustive list of questions, but these are the things that we are looking at when we are doing a profile of a dog in sheltering. How does the dog process and learn? What are they capable of learning and retaining while they're in the shelter? What is their history? What were they bringing along from their past experiences? And then looking at learning as functional and not merely operant. So the things that we do in the shelter inform how the dog, especially since the dog is potentially in a state of high or chronic stress and has a greater propensity to form fear memories. We really want to look at how we're performing certain tasks as far as the dogs are concerned, so that we're not inadvertently making things worse during their tenure at the shelter. Identifying different genetic groups based on what the dogs, or I'm sorry, the E, what type of physical and social environment are they coming from, and what are they best suited to? How can we help them to be stable at the shelter? How can we help them transition to their new environment, whether it be in a home or in foster care? And then this is a larger question: how can we adapt the shelter environment to suit the current sheltering paradigm, where we are trying to place dogs and they're subsequently staying with us much longer? And what affordances does the environment offer? And then genetics, identifying genetic group based on what dogs may or may not have been selected for or adapted to. We use a tool called the dog key, which is a software and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but it takes the different morphological traits and actually identifies the predominant breed group in that dog, not breed, genetic group in that dog. And then once we have that information, we want to create programs, enrichment opportunities, housing decisions based on how the dog's genetics are presenting. Again, the genetics are not prescriptive, but if they are presenting in a certain way, we can do things to help them exercise those natural instincts. And then their self, we're considering their physical and mental states, their age, if they're on any medications, injuries, things like that. Okay, so some of the main tenets of the L.E.G.S program in and of itself are: we want to create a common language and understanding of dogs. And we also want to help staff, volunteers, adopters understand the L.E.G.S of their organization and each dog and the people they work with. So we come in and we take we do a L.E.G.S assessment of the entire organization, and we also have a L.E.G.S assessment for each member of the organization, so that L.E.G.S is kind of designed to really be able to take a bird's eye view and look at the whole picture and see, like, from a very objective place, like what are the components of this thing. And when we can do that, not only with our organization, but the people we work with, we're actually able to approach the people we work with in our organization with a greater level of compassion and enthusiasm, just like we do with the dogs that we work with. So those things are really important to consider. We also have really streamlined, quick, easy assessments for each dog that, again, will inform their care, housing, and how we communicate about them with adopters, as well as providing talking points for adopters, even when not much is known about the dog. So that was a huge thing for my staff, is we'd get a dog in and we wouldn't know anything about them. And then the adopter would say, "Tell me about this dog." And they're like, "Yeah, they just came in. I don't know." And so through this L.E.G.S assessment, we are actually able to give the adopters more information based on some of the things that we're observing. We also have a L.E.G specific adopter survey, and then the Dog's Truth, which is a shortened version of Kim's grand L.E.G.S Family Dog Mediation Applied Pathology course that's geared for families, for adopters. One of the other tenets is accurate genetic grouping identification, using the dog key. So like I said, you just you go to the software, it literally takes 30 seconds. You plug in the different morphological traits of the dog in front of you, and the software spits out the predominant genetic grouping or groupings. And sometimes it comes back as, a super mutt or world dog. It is really difficult when we're looking at genetics, because one of the main issues that we have around that is we are not very good at identifying breeds. But what the dog key does is it's not identifying breeds, it's identifying groups. And what knowing the group will do will help to inform those decisions, because the group in and of itself was designed for specific utility. And so those are things that we can utilize in our enrichment and some of the decisions that we're making. The dog key is about just as accurate as the genetic testing. We've done our own kind of in-house studies, and we've run hundreds of dogs through it that also have genetic tests, and we're about 90% accurate, which is what Embark and Wisdom Panel purport their results are. So it's a really great tool to use in the shelters, and we have a whole training program around it. And then finally, giving them the greatest access to the 5 domains while in captivity. And this is something that we don't talk a lot about, that like dogs who are in the shelter are actually, and who are they're in captivity, and actually largely dogs at this point in this day and age in the 21st century who are in homes are also in captivity, because captivity means the definition of captivity is that there's not a lot of agency, and someone else is sort of making all your decisions for you, right? And so even in homes, pet dogs are living in captivity, but in the shelter is absolutely that situation, because we're in smaller spaces and all that. So we want to look at this point, our shelters were kind of built to house dogs for a short period of time, and we're not doing that anymore. And so, possibly looking at the models that zoos and wildlife rescues are taking in order to keep the dogs in their care mentally and emotionally stable while they're in their care are things that we really want to start looking at as we continue to keep dogs for longer and longer periods of time. All right, so some global considerations that we look at, that we talk about a lot in our individual shelter division, but as family dog mediators as well. So we want to look at the legs of the shelter and the pet industry. And so we kind of look back at the history and see where have we come from, and why do we do the things the way we do, so we can see how we can help the dogs even more. If we look at the legs of the shelter industry, we see that our industry began as a means for public health, right? Like that's why we're here, was we were trying to control rabies and keep pesky, mangy mutts off the street. And animal welfare in and of itself started working at, trying to improve the welfare of animals. But, foundationally, sheltering was created for public health. And then we did that for a number of years, and a lot of really, not so great things happened. And so we were like, let's stop doing this. And so we started to develop adopt, don't shop, and the no-kill paradigm, and all of that happened in a very short period of time. And what the consequence of that is that our infrastructure was not able to keep up. And so the facilities and programs that we have or had were designed to house the dogs for their mandatory holding period. And then they were, they went off to whatever disposition was determined. And so now we're looking at dogs that are being held for weeks, months, even years. And so when we're thinking of global considerations, and I don't know the answers to all these questions, and I don't think a lot of us do, but they're things that we, as family dog mediators, and when we're looking at the L.E.G.S model, we really want to consider are how are the dogs legs changing through their time at the shelter, and how can we facilitate their healthy legs while they're in our care? And do we need to adopt practices similar to zoos for captive animals, and make decisions based on how the dog is adapting to those conditions? And then also looking at how quickly animal welfare changes, and trying to figure out how, I don't know. I never figured this out when I was there. How do we keep up with the times while we're bailing water and putting Band-Aids on things? It's really hard. Things to consider, that we, the sort of ethical, philosophical questions that we talk about all the time is, should it be the responsibility of the public to shoulder the burden of difficult dogs, or is it the shelter rescue's job to keep fractious dogs out of our communities? Does working on the pretense that genetics don't matter create as many problems as it alleviates? And in order to save them, are we preventing a life worth living? Again, I don't know the answers to these questions, but they're the hard questions that we don't have time to talk about. But they're things to consider as we're moving, as we continue this course toward animal welfare. So what are some things that we can do? One of the things that I would encourage anyone to do, and if you're interested, you can email me and I can send you a more elaborate list, is to do a L.E.G.S assessment of your organization. In order to know where you're going, you've got to know where you've been. So when we're looking at a L.E.G.S assessment of an organization, we're looking at the organization's experiences through time, their leadership's background, their training, all of those things. We're looking at their physical environment, their organization's culture, their relationship with other groups, their relationship with their local governments, and the culture of their communities. The G is genetics is their history and their origins and their missions, and their municipalities' laws, and all those things. And then their S is their specializations and programs and requirements, and all of the little nitty-gritty policies that we have. But we want to kind of take a look at all those things, and I have a kind of questionnaire to kind of look at all of those things. So if anybody's interested, you can reach out to me and I can send that to you. Some of the resources to learn more about L.E.G.S are the L.E.G.S Applied Ethology and Family Dog Mediation course by Kim Brophy. And there's a link to that on my final page. The Dog's Truth, which is an hour version of that, created for the public. The Dog Key, the genetic heritage software. The L.E.G.S Meet Your Dog Adopter Survey, which I can also give everybody access to. The book Meet Your Dog by Kim Brophy, and then the L.E.G.S for Shelter Rescue program. If anybody's interested in learning more about that, you can contact me. And then we are doing, we are currently offering a pilot for any shelters or rescues that are interested in participating. So the Dog's Truth, like I said, is the hour version of the Applied Ethology course, created for the public, for adopters. And so you can get access to 100 coupon codes for your adopters for $500, or you can participate in the pilot program where we give you a year of free access to coupons for adopters in return for some very basic data, like 6 questions. It's not a big deal at all. And that's available for a limited time. So if anybody's interested in that, you can shoot me an email. And that is all I have. I think I got through everything. All right, 34 minutes. Cool. So we have time for any questions. And I'll leave the information up there.
Awesome. Thank you, Angie. That was super interesting.